this works. Record. Okay, you're good.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for October 27th, 2022. We're going to start off with a prayer by Jesse and a Pledge of Allegiance by Lewis.
Okay. Our Father in heaven, we're grateful to come together tonight as a community to discuss the affairs of Mapleton City, and we're grateful for the fortunate circumstances that we find ourselves. We pray that as we discuss these agenda items that we can have a spirit with us, that we can come to the resolution that is best for the city, and that we can do so in a harmonious way. We're grateful for the many things that we've been given, and we recognize how fortunate we are, and for the responsibility that we have as citizens and as volunteers within the city to do the best that we can, and we pray that we can have the guidance this night. We love you so much, and we ask for these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll jump right into it. We've got two items on the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda are routine in nature and do not require discussion or independent action. Members of the commission may ask that any items be considered individually for purpose of commission discussion and for public comment. Unless that is done, one motion may be used to adopt all recommended actions. So the first one is Planning Commission meeting minutes from September 8th. And the second one, a consideration of a conditional use permit for an auto repair detailing business located at 1655 West Maple Street in the general commercial zone. Does anybody have any discussion topics to talk about on those two, or we'll entertain a motion?
I'll motion that we accept and approve the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion by Cherie and a second by Jesse. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Item number 3 is an action item. Consideration of a preliminary plat for the Preserve Plat B subdivision consisting of 27 lots located at approximately 2000 South Preserve Drive in the planned residential unit PRC4 zone. Sean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. This is probably a project you've heard a little bit about over the years, right? Back in 2006, there was a PRC zone approved for the preserve and a concept plan for 92 total lots. Since that time, 5 plats have been developed with about 65 lots. The applicant is now requesting preliminary plat approval for the final 27 lots. The lots range in size from 2.5 to 6.5 acres in size, so very large lot development. This is the area in yellow is the preserve project as a whole, and the area in blue is the area that's undeveloped that would be those final 27 lots. This was the approved concept plan from 2006. Most of the areas that have been developed were developed pretty close to this plan. There are some minor changes to this phase, but the lot count and the lot sizes are generally consistent. This is the proposed plat for this phase. You see there's the connection to Preserve Drive on the top of the page, and then the road will loop through and connect to the other portions of the preserve that leads you out to either Main Street or 1600 South. You see there's a cul-de-sac that's proposed on the southern end, and there's an easement that leads to the southern property. The neighbors to the south have submitted an email that the commission has requesting that there be a formal stub street there rather than just an easement. We've had some discussions since that email came in with both the applicant and the neighbor. The applicant is proposing to do this final phase this final plat in probably 3 phases. You can see kind of 2 on the north, and then 1 phase would be the southern phase on the south. And so one of the things we've discussed with the applicant and with the neighbors is one possible option would be the commission to just approve the north phases, leave the southern phase, which would allow the southern property owner some time to more thoroughly examine the development potential of their property so we can determine whether a stub street is really necessary. They're concerned that they just don't want to not have a stub street and then be limited in the future. And the applicant's concerned that they don't want to build a stub road, put all that expense in if one is not necessarily needed. So we think that's probably a good option, is just to defer that final portion of this phase and have them bring it back when the other two have been developed and we've got a little more information on that property to the south. Other than that, we're really excited to have this project after all these years come to fruition, and our recommendation would be to move forward with those northern two phases. The applicant is here as well, if you have any questions for them.
Thank you, Sean. This is an action item, so we'll move on to comments within the Planning Commission members, if there's any questions for the applicant.
So is that stub road the area between lot 87 and the open space?
Yes,
Okay.
that's the easement. That their proposal was to grant an easement that if the property to the south needed it, they could then build it.
Okay.
So that was what their original proposal was.
Okay. And then I was reading staff report. It sounds like the trail to Bonneville, the Shoreline Trail, we're talking about just doing a cash donation to the city and letting the city work with that?
Correct. So they came back, you may recall, and said, hey, we're interested in helping you build it on 1600 South. We presented that to the council, and there was some pushback from the neighbors in that area, concerns about parking and access, and it's also very steep. So then they came to us and said, well, what if we help you, we provide a donation that can help you in other locations? And we think that's a really good option. We're just in the initial phases of a trail master plan, and there's a lot of really productive things I think that'll be better options for us
To get up there.
than to have it here.
Yeah. Because if we did it anywhere within here, it's probably not going to be as wide and as accessible as what we'd like it to be, considering the amount of resources you're probably going to put up there.
Correct.
Okay.
It looks like there is a trail. Is that for the subdivision itself, or?
Yeah, they're just showing where they would have access to get up from their property. Mhm. You may want to have the applicant see if he's got any additional comments or.
Is the applicant here? Do you have anything to add to staff's presentation?
Hi, everybody. No, I think that Sean covered it. We're excited to move forward. We know it's been a bit of a slog here. Just a quick comment on the stub road to the joiners. We had an agreement with the joiners, which we'd be open to looking at again. I think our comment there, to Sean's, point of maybe phasing this. I mean, obviously, we'd like to get the plat approval on the entire thing. But we don't want to build a road if, the joiner's property doesn't get developed in a way that needs it. And I don't think the city wants to, take possession of a road that doesn't go anywhere either. So it seems to make sense to just maybe slow roll that. We thought the easement was a good, compromise. We're open to leaving that easement, there for however long, the city thinks it needs to be there, if they, it sounds like there might be some, activity from the joiners, getting a development agreement, so we're happy to leave that there for, the length of time the city, needs it. We, ultimately, if we don't, if the city doesn't need a stub road there, we'd like to, extinguish the easement at some point, but we're happy to have it there until, you guys decide kind of what, that other property is going to look like, so.
I had a quick question. One of the emails was from the Ensign Bickford regarding a pipeline easement. Is that right?
Yeah, I'd like to know about that.
Yeah. Can you
Yeah,
elaborate a little bit more about that?
The easement is not in the city's name, that's in the name of Ensign Bickford, and so any changes to that easement would be between the applicant and
Okay.
Ensign Bickford. Well, we would not record a final plat that had a note saying something was going to be vacated unless there was an agreement that we knew about. So
Okay.
it,
So you're
that'll all get worked out. And
Yeah, so we contacted Ensign Bickford and met with their representative,
Okay.
you know, a couple of months ago as we were contemplating this design. And, you know, Sean, I think I sent you, you know, the preliminary, you know, adjustment to that. Again, we know that's as a private party thing, but, you know, to put the city's mind at ease, like, we are working with that. We were proactive and working with that company to make sure, you know, that the easement, you know, will shift slightly based on, you know, where we put the lots, but, you know, won't impact their, you know, pipeline.
Yeah, okay. One other question I had was pertaining to the park. Love the park, great use of space. Is that going to be deeded over to the city for you guys to maintain?
It'll be
or-
private.
It'll be private, okay. All right, I'm out of questions.
I have one more, Sean. In the ordinance for stub roads with the city, if one was to go in, that would then require the joiners to actually incorporate that into their design, correct?
yeah, so that was one of the discussions I've had with the applicant today is just if they decided to do only 2 lots, they would have to build the full road and make the connection. And so that's why.
Easement makes a lot more sense in this case if they don't have a design, because otherwise.
Easement or at least take a little more time to come up with a concept plan so we know whether a stub road would be needed or not.
So if we approved all 3 plats with the easement, then how would that work is it better, I guess, to approve all 3 with the
Phases.
easement, or approve the 2, leave the 3rd, so that we can still have a little bit of say in that, or what would you?
Yeah, I think my recommendation, since we don't know what's happening on the joiners yet, and if they're going to do those other phases, it would make sense to delay that 3rd phase so we can really work that out to determine whether the stub road is needed, right?
Before he goes and sinks a bunch of costs into it.
How much time do you think it's going to be before you get to that 3rd phase?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sheree. So I was talking to my partners last night, and we've got, you know, what we think is pretty good demand for these lots coming up. So we're going to develop it in phases, but, you know, like, it's very possible this will be done within, you know, the next calendar 12 months kind of thing, right? So I would say that the only argument for, you know, approving all 3 is that, you know, we're just going to be back here doing this again, you know, probably with not a lot more clarity. That might guess, right? Like, that's my instinct. Like, developments take a long time, you know, to kind of come together. You know, I think the easement does, you know, provide the flexibility for the city to, you know, have a stub road there, which is, I think, what your goal is, right? So, again, I think we're open to however you guys want to do it, but, you know, obviously we would prefer, you know, a little bit, you know, of clarity on this plat that we've worked on, and just would like to get moving.
Could we say that that the staff has the ability to, depending on what Joyner does?
The challenge, I think, is if the commission and council decides, yes, the stub road is needed, it is, according to our ordinance, the obligation of the applicant, this applicant, to provide the stub road, to take the road to the southern boundary, right? So that's the question, is do they do it? Or in this scenario, it would leave the burden on
The
the other
joiners.
developer to build the full roadway, which is still an option you could take. But the way it typically works is the subdivision ordinance says, if a stub road is needed, the commission and the council can require it, and it should be taken to the border of your property. And that's why, to me, it makes sense to wait a little bit, because for you to say right now, yes, put it in, they're then obligated to build the road. And then if joiners come in the future and they don't need it, they've made that expense without necessarily needing to have done that. Whereas at least this may buy a little time. He may be right. We may be back here in 6 months or 8 months, and you'll have to decide then, yes, put in the stub road, or no, you don't.
But the joiners have access to their property through the
Another.
Clock subdivision, right?
Yeah,
Just
there's-
to the south, so this road with the current plot and layout of a future, with how the joiners' property is, 27 lots, if I'm not mistaken, would be served with that road that's already there, so a stub road wouldn't be needed unless they increased the density.
Yeah, so 30, you can have up to 30 on a single dead-end road. I think it's probably difficult to assume they'll get more than 30, but until somebody does an engineered plan or at least lays out a concept with, it's difficult to know. That's,
Well, we know it won't be more than that. I mean, at least there's a good chance. And I would say my only heartburn on it would be just the connectivity issue. If joiners do sell, by the time, they have to make a decision on what they want right there, it's just nice if they did sell and have several lots in there, that there is connectivity. If
Well,
it's
I think
two
that's the-
big lots, then it doesn't matter. But-
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think that was the idea with the easement. I mean, initially, and again, like, no one's interested in rehashing history on this, we were kind of opposed to any easement or stub road, mostly because it wasn't required, but secondarily because, the profile of these lots and the continuity of this neighborhood was just gonna be different than what, that property would be, right? So there's some differences in sort of aesthetic that we were worried about just a bit. So we thought the easement was a good, compromise. And if the city is interested in that connectivity, then we have the option to do it. But in light of sort of the ambiguity surrounding that property, it's tough. It is quite tough for us to, want to put a stub road in, with that expense.
I don't blame you. How
Yeah.
long is that stretch?
That's a good question. Can we go back a little bit?
It's not too bad.
depends on how
So-
you may design it totally differently
Right,
if a
right.
stub road is required, right? The cul-de-sac may
gotcha.
extend, but you're still
That's looking like
several hundred feet.
Yeah, 500 feet, 400 or 500 feet, something like that.
So, yeah, I would say we have to kind of figure out, do we want the burden to be on you or the joiners, potentially? And maybe there's no burden then.
It'd be interesting too if, the question was posed to the joiners and they didn't require it, for the city the code didn't require it, would the joiners be interested in putting it in regardless for connect? So it's like, I think it's, up to the city to just kind of decide where. And previously, we had an agreement with the joiners if we would have got the previous plan, approved, that we were gonna split that cost. I mean, we're open to talking with Leslie and Wally about, options there. But we're also interested in aggressively moving forward and finishing the development. And I feel like that timeline's gonna be a little different than what the joiners' timeline is gonna be.
Sean, has a traffic study been done to see if a connectivity is even needed?
There's not enough lots in this to require one. Our view, so the code section, there's two things you're looking at. One is a road necessary for an adequate and convenient circulation system? From a citywide perspective, the connectivity here is not an important transportation need. But there are benefits to connecting neighborhoods, clearly. It gives it multiple options for egress and ingress for emergency vehicles. It makes neighborhoods,
Yeah, it's a no-brainer. I
so
think.
there's reasons to do it, but that's a little more of a discretionary question. The next one is it needed for the logical development of adjacent properties? And they do have access, so they can develop their property. The question is would they need a stub street to maximize or to be able to do more than those 30 lots? And that we just don't know yet because there hasn't been a plan.
So the reality is it's really just a question of increasing connectivity is typically better, but it's not necessary to meet any requirements that the city would impose on that development or the joiners development.
Yeah, I mean, the code section is a may, so the commission and the council have to make a determination. Is the stub road important for connectivity and also or for the logical development?
So,
And so
yeah,
part of the reason I think it's probably better to at least give this a little more time is to see if we get some more answers to those questions before you have to definitively say, yes, put it in, or no, don't.
Because, yeah, we don't know what the joiner site is, so we can't say whether or not that connectivity is even needed. And so I think either an easement or delaying that phase is something I'm comfortable with. I'm not comfortable saying they have to put in a stub road if we just don't know.
Yeah.
I don't
And you
see that
can-
as a need.
You're making a recommendation to the council, so you could make a recommendation that was either
Yeah.
of those.
One other quick comment, so to your point, TJ, like the easement does allow the city to have a stub road and the joiners to have a stub road. Like that's the whole point of it, right? And so like similar to how we would kick the can down the road on, sort of a partial approval, like the easement does actually accomplish that already, right? And, obviously we'd like, full preliminary approval tonight, so we can kind of move forward, with some confidence. But again, I think the easement does accomplish, that for the city, leaving some optionality there. And it really comes down to a question of who's paying for it, in the end. And again, like, we're used to that at this point, trying to figure out, where the ball lands on those things. And again, we're open to what the city wants to do. But as far as like, preserving your optionality, like a full preliminary approval tonight leaves the option of a stub road on the property. So that's what we would obviously, prefer.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
More questions for the applicant? Okay, we can stew upon.
What's that?
Sounds like you had a good motion to start, TJ?
Before you make your motion, restate it, or kind of rehash, restate?
I don't feel that there's a need to require a stub road at this point, because we don't know what the joiners are doing. And so I think the most appropriate thing is to either ask for a delay on that third phase or the easement. And I'm fine with just approving the whole thing and saying, give us the easement, but I'm also fine saying, let's wait on the third phase.
The wording on the plat have to word it to require that that easement is specifically for a future stub road?
It just needs to be a right-of-way easement.
Right-of-way easement.
I tend to want to lean the way of what you recommend, Sean, because I feel like you have a feel for this sort of thing. And yes, it would require one more meeting to Planning Commission, but he could get on quick and it'd be a easy in and out.
The biggest thing is, if it's not a recorded plat, he can't turn around and start selling these lots until he comes back for a second.
True? Could just take reservations.
So there's really two options here, is to approve the entire plat with the easement, knowing that any future connectivity road would be on the joiner's burden to make those improvements, or approve everything but that last phase and have the applicant work out an agreement with the joiners on that last phase to determine who's responsible for that stub road?
Yeah, I think that the difficulty in this situation is the easement option that's not something we typically do, right? It's either you require the stub road or you don't. The easement came up because the two parties had gotten together previously, said, hey, this could be a solution. And so that's where that came in. But the stub road that goes into Joiner's property, right, that was built by the adjacent developer. That's the typical process for doing it. That's why, to me, it makes a little more sense to wait on this, just because the decision really should be, yeah, you need a stub road, or no, you don't.
Right.
The easement option, again, is a little bit unique. And if the two parties came together and had an agreement again, then that would be something we would be satisfied with.
I got a motion.
Great.
Okay, I recommend approval of the preliminary plat with the exception of Phase 3 to City Council, with the condition that the applicant comply with any outstanding DRC comments.
A second.
Okay, we have a motion by Jesse and a second by Lewis. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes.
This would be, City Council is next Wednesday, so the 3rd for
So
anyone
if
that's
anybody
following.
has any further comments or things to address, is that a public comment, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, they can submit comments
Comments
in
to
writing.
via
for sure.
email, okay. Moving on to item number 4, this is a public hearing item, consideration of an ordinance adopting Mapleton City Code Section 18.84.425, governing short-term rentals within the city. We'll turn the time over to Sean.
So I'll go over that one, Mr. Chair, if that's all right. On to the easy one. So just a little background description here. 2014, council adopted an ordinance that allowed short-term rentals as conditional use in the A2 zone. 2 were approved at that time. 1 is no longer in operation. 2021, they removed short-term rentals as conditional uses in the A2 zone. There was some interest in adopting an ordinance that would address it, not just in the A2 zone, but in all residential zones. And then last month, the city council discussed short-term rentals. They directed staff to prepare a draft ordinance that would allow short-term rentals on a limited basis, which is in your packet we've gone over. Just to go over some of the goals of the general plan that would touch on this. This goal 3, ensure land use or compatibility and or utilize adequate buffers to enhance compatibility. Ensure commercial uses that are allowed in residential zones that are incidental to the main residential or agriculture use and do not negatively impact the quiet rural atmosphere of the area. So with that in mind, the first thing, the recommendation that would need to be made, obviously after the public hearing and everything, but is whether to allow these or not, if short-term rentals would meet that standard that we have in the goal. If no, we can just make that recommendation to the city council. If yes, we can discuss the draft ordinance that's been provided and is in your packet. Some of the restrictions that city council discussed last month, they must be owner occupied. We can go into more of these too, but I'll just kind of go over the Reader's Digest of this. But they must be owner occupied. The primary dwelling or the accessory, whichever one's rented out, could be rented for no more than 90 days per year, so about a quarter of the year they could be rented out. And then set a limit on maximum occupancy, which would be 12 at the most, or I think it's 2 per bedroom is what we came up with. Just some more to come up with. Require sufficient on-site parking. That's been a concern that people have brought up. I think in the ordinance it talks about one parking spot per 4 people that would be renting it out. Require 2-night stay minimum. That would alleviate some of the concerns about party groups. Nobody parties for 2 nights in a row. So, and then the neighbor notification. So once this has been approved, sending out the conditions that were attached to those and contact information for the applicant, the property owner there. So our recommendations, obviously, there's the 4. You can recommend that the city council not allow short-term rentals. You can recommend that they adopt it as proposed, adopt it with some changes, or we can table it and continue this discussion with whatever additional information is needed. So I think that's all we had on that.
Just a couple of additional comments. So you've seen from the written comments and the Facebook comments that it covers the gamut, right? You've got some very adamantly against having short-term rentals at all. Others want them and don't want the city to regulate them, and kind of everywhere in between. The council has had some discussions just on this in generally. The council hasn't taken a position that yes, absolutely, we want to do this. Their recommendation was, let's see if there's an ordinance that can mitigate some of the concerns and allow property owners the ability to do this at some level. And so that was the direction. So the commission really has all of these options at their discretion when they're making the recommendation. What we try to do is say, okay, if the goal is to make sure that if you are allowing these, that they're incidental or they're not taking over as the primary use, some of these conditions may help establish that. So I think that's just a little bit of background of why we're where we're at. So as Ryan mentioned, our recommendation would be to take public comment Once the public hearing is over, your first question would be, as a commission, do you think the city should allow them? If your answer is no, you can make that recommendation, and that would be as far as we need to take it. If your recommendation is yes, then you can get into some of the meat of the ordinance and determine whether changes should be made. Okay?
Thank you, Sean and Ryan. As stated, this is a public hearing comment. We will open up public hearing at this time. We ask anybody has anything to bring up to state your name for the mic for the record and keep your comments to about 3 to 5 minutes so we can give everybody the opportunity to speak.
My name's Mike Colby. I live at 325 North, 300 West, just right over here. I have a couple clarification questions before I make any comment. Short-term rentals can be used as the whole entire dwelling or just a room or a basement in a dwelling. Are you going to address that in your ordinance? Or have you thought about that?
That's what it envisions. It's the owner needs to occupy the property,
Yes.
but if you had a basement apartment, that yes, that could be used as a
And
short-term,
so, as
something
far
like
as you're
that.
concerned, you don't care whether he lives in a little one room in the basement, you know, I mean, there's not gonna be a huge market for these things in Mapleton anyway. I don't know why people are so freaked out about it. The only comments that I would have are, first off, the impacts of this would be less than accessory apartments, significantly less. If they worked out for people, they could actually make about the same amount of money. I ran some calculations that they could with an accessory apartment with far less impact, far less problems. Having used these a lot in my travels around the state into Moab, the biggest violations that I see are parking. People hauling in a trailer and a boat and parking them on the street. There would need to be some penalties involved if people didn't comply with those. And for example, in Grand County, there's significant penalties. They just call the sheriff and he comes out and he takes care of stuff pretty fast. Let's see. The 90-day issue I think is great. The anti-comments about this are basically the same arguments that were made with accessory apartments. And I get it, but you know, it's interesting that our freedom does not stop at our neighbor's fence in this community for some reason. We seem to be able to think that we can control what our neighbors do. Another thing to keep in consideration is fully a third of your new developments this won't happen in because there's CC&Rs in place already. So all of these over here, the ones over here, most of those already restrict those type of, and so you need to take that into consideration in your equations of how big of an impact it's actually going to be, because it's not. I would like to ask you to seriously consider not restricting this to lot size or dwelling size or those types of things. It's discriminatory against those of us who would like to participate in things like this, that we could, you know, maybe stay in our houses, or maybe our kids could stay in their houses. And that's basically all I had to say. One other thing on your last subject, thank heavens, on the preserve, I heard that 4 times. That was, I'm hoping that it will happen.
Thanks, Mike.
We all agree.
I'm Charlie Hanna. I've been giving this idea a lot of thought. I would hope that you would continue this discussion. I'd like to have discussions with Sean and Jake, and Bishop Nuttall's too busy, so I'm not going to discuss with him. But Sean and Jake would be good enough. I think that this could open up some really wonderful opportunities for this city. I've been looking at some of the cities that are about our size, and oh, you guys, we're just lacking. I mean, we are in the minus category on some things. There's just no way to put that any differently. But I think that this is a step to start moving us into some directions. I won't go into any further detail because I have a lot of thoughts for Sean and Jake that I can talk with. But I do hope that you continue this, because it could move this city into some very exciting possibilities. So.
Thank you, Charlie.
If
I'd ask that you direct all your comments to Sean and Ryan, as we can't talk to citizens about comments or applications that come before this commission until they actually come before the commission. So all comments have to go through Sean and Ryan.
We got it.
Love you, Charlie,
Oh,
but if you could.
We'll talk anyway.
If it doesn't get continued, you may want to speak now or forever
No,
hold
it's
your
longer,
peace.
it's longer than 3 minutes. There are some really neat thoughts that I've talked with Camille about, and
So ours is just a recommendation that goes before the city council. So whatever we decide, the city council could 180 the whole thing. So I would encourage you to write all those thoughts down and send it on to Sean, and Sean could pass it on to.
we're going to do face-to-face, because there's some things we've got to look at. Who has the best ordinance on this? Have you looked at that? Who has the worst ordinance? Why is the best ordinance working? Why is the worst ordinance not looking? And that's just the beginning level of some of what I would like to talk to you guys about.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Charlie.
Okay, thanks, Charlie.
Bye.
Good evening. My name's Loretta Rose. Just quickly, I had a question on the draft ordinance. Under the violations section, is that to be written later? Is that why it says it's described in section 18.88?
No, it's just already adopted in the city code.
Okay, so that's what's already in the city code as it is. So I just have a couple of suggestions. I understand that a lot of people want to engage in this sort of business activity, but it needs to not be at the expense of the existing neighborhoods, okay? That should be a top priority. So I noticed in your draft ordinance, it says the occupants shall comply with Mapleton City's disturbing the peace ordinance. I think that needs to be a little stronger. If you'll look at North Salt Lake's short-term rental ordinance, it's very strong, they give a lot of verbiage that will allow for enforcement of infractions, okay? The way they put it is, should a renter violate the noise control chapter more than once in any given 72-hour period, they shall be immediately evicted from the property by the owner, okay? So I think we need to have a little stronger enforcement written into the short-term rental ordinance so that the owners are able to get the enforcement that they need if their renters are causing a problem, okay? The other thing I think is really important, again, in the North Salt Lake ordinance for short-term rentals is a section called urgent response. And if I could quickly just read that and think if it makes sense to you. The owner or a designated representative shall be available to immediately respond 24 hours a day, 365 days per year by telephone, and when necessary, be able to physically respond within 1 hour of any legitimate complaint. If the owner is unreachable after 3 attempts by the city, a notice of violation will be issued. So I think if the city does go ahead and grant these short-term rentals to be allowed, we need to have written into the language of the ordinance how it can be enforced, and it cannot be ambiguous. It must be very clear so that if law enforcement needs to come or if the owner needs to evict the renters, then it's easy to be done and unquestionable. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta.
My name's Sebastian Jakins. I did send an email, and so thank you for including in there. I think that outlines a lot of my concerns with the proposed ordinance. Just wanted to point out a few things. Right now, if you were to go onto Google and look for a place to stay temporarily here in Mapleton, there are no results. There's no options right now. My family, we have a family of 5, and when we travel, a lot of times we're limited to places where they take 5 people or there's an extra cost. I think the short-term rentals give us more of a capacity to handle that. We live in a community where there's a lot of, family's important. It's a big thing, and I think the short-term rentals allow for that to happen and just give families who are, especially in today's economy, cost conscious, that just provides a lot more opportunities. And then I just wanted to talk about some of the concerns. The transient nature of the occupants is a concern. In my mind, I guess I don't think that should be a concern at all. If people want to travel here and come to visit Mapleton, visiting family, maybe for Provo, they're trying to stay someplace close. I think we should embrace that. The community is already changing just with the amount of housing, with the building that's going on. Things are going to be different, and I think we should embrace it. As far as disturbing the peace goes and some of the concerns, I do understand that as a concern, but I think it was brought up in the last meeting with the current short-term rentals that are going on. There haven't been any complaints up to this point. Maybe that's changed in the last month or so, but the only real complaints is that it's happening, not that anyone's actually doing anything to disturb the neighbors. And so I would just like to kind of voice my opinion again and just say, from my feeling, we live in an area that's generally has conservative values, and one of those is to not impose undue regulations and restrictions on people and give them the ability to use their property in the way they see fit. And so if it was up to me, like the first speaker who was up here, let's just scrap it and let people kind of do what they want with their property. I would be for that. I understand, there's safety aspects and things like that, and so I understand some limits, but just to try to make them as open and available as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quite nervous. I've never come to a city council meeting, and I also was not necessarily planning anything, but I do think there's a lot of strength in what he just said, in people being able to have the freedom to use their property as they like. I don't think that is a total whiteboard. Of course, I love these strong points that you made as well, that if we do have a regulation, we should know how to enforce it. It should be very clear so that it can be enforced. Otherwise, it's just a lot more work. But keeping those regulations to the things that really we know are going to be beneficial across the board, and then otherwise not doing it. Because for me, I would love to be able to travel with my family. To do that, I would rent out my house while I'm gone for the week for another family to maybe have a family reunion. But that might be a kid room, and you have 5 bedrooms with 2 people in each, so a kid room would be breaking the rules. But it just feels like once you start having so many tentacles, it's really hard to know if you're not kind of overstepping on the way people want to use the property. And it's something I love about this area, and I love about this town, this city, is that we have this community where we have our own autonomy, but we also take care of each other. And so having clear descriptions of what happens for violations, but keeping those hands kind of back from regulating everything. Like the 90-day, why? I mean, maybe someone who wants to rent their basement out the whole year, but they are a good landlord manager, and then they rent a room out, and that's a short-term rental that they live off of. So the 90-day thing is saying that for however many days of the year, you can't do that. I mean, why? Where are these barometers or barriers coming from? It feels like once you get past very clearly helpful, like noise regulations, I don't know. That's clearly the discussion, I understand, so I'll stop there. But I feel strongly about trying to let people have liberty and freedom and autonomy to choose. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, my name's Heather Naylor. Excuse me, this is my first meeting too, so I love that everybody, like new people are coming and doing this and trying it out. I did write an email, so, but I kind of want to just readdress some of the things that I had put in there and some of the things that people have already stated. As you guys probably well know, we live in a pretty quiet, safe place. This isn't LA, it's not North Salt Lake. We're not getting parties. I have an Airbnb in town. And what I can tell you is that the people who stay there come for family reunions. They come for weddings, oftentimes at the Quiet Meadow Farm in town, or they're coming for a funeral. And I have a guy coming tomorrow who's coming to watch his daughter play in the state tournament with Maple Mountain. I'm not getting groups of teenagers. This isn't where people come to do that kind of thing. So I'm not exactly sure where the concern is with that. I've never had a group that was loud, that disturbed my neighbors. I've never had anybody say anything. It's always been good experiences. I had a US diplomat's family come and stay for months at my place. So the people who come here are good quality people and their families are here. So they kind of all fall under that same umbrella. The 90-day thing, I agree. I don't exactly know where that comes from. If that were the case, I would actually have to turn my place into a long-term rental instead of short-term, because it wouldn't afford me the opportunity. That's 75% of the year that I have to maintain that, pay the bills on that without anyone in there. So the owner-occupied thing, I think that's fantastic. I think that would keep down any issues that potentially might arise. The occupancy, people, like it's already been stated, people are coming because they want to stay with their family. They don't want to rent 5 hotel rooms. They all want to stay together. They can very clearly see how many rooms there are, how many beds are in each room, things of that nature. So if they want to pack in like sardines, they know they're doing that before they even rent it, and that's why they're doing it, so they can all stay together. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Ellen Jensen. I think short-term rentals can be a great benefit for many people. I just have a few concerns that I'd like to address. I feel like that's really close. I'd like some more clarification with B5 and 6. What exactly that means. I don't know if you want to clarify that now, or if you want me to keep.
Yeah, probably
going.
just outline your
Okay.
questions, and then at the end,
Great.
we'll address any that are.
And-
So that, which section were you referring to?
Section B5 and 6, what really determines, so for example, if you have a venue and you're renting out the venue, but you're not renting out your house, can you still have an Airbnb in your home because you're not renting out your home? I mean, you're not having a venue in your home, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Another thing is how you will be monitoring the short-term rentals, and that they're complying to the rules set forth by the city. For example, 12 guests, 90 days. How is that going to be monitored? Will the short-term rentals be taxed by the city? Are you just paying for a business license each year? How are you going to monitor the Airbnbs that they are complying with the disturbing of the peace ordinance? Are you asking the neighbors to turn people in? Is that kind of what we're looking at? And then what are the penalties for people breaking the ordinances, right? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.
My name is Angela Silva. I just have two to three comments. The first is regarding the 90-day limit. I think that's a wise addition to the ordinance, because you as the Planning Commission have the job of managing zones in the city. And once I think that once you have a short-term rental, you then are introducing a commercial purpose in a residential zone. And so the costs, the negative impacts of that are something to consider for the residents surrounding that area. The second is I would echo the comments about enforceable language. The noise ordinance for the city, unless you're talking about the times, 10 to 7, it's not that ordinance, the noise ordinance is pretty unenforceable. It verges on arbitrary and capricious. And so I would suggest that if you're going to have that as a founding principle in this ordinance, that you firm up the other, well, that you suggest that the city council firm up the other ordinance. And I think that's all.
Thank you.
Members of the committee, my name is Rick Silva. So there's great comments that were made by everybody. A couple things I want to say. First of all, before it escapes my mind, because change is happening, doesn't require more change. So yes, there's change. That doesn't mean that more change should happen. I think I heard that earlier tonight. You know, we're not at the mercy of fate, and that's why we're here tonight, to make decisions about what things should be. So I want to make sure that we're doing things in a purposeful manner. One thing that stuck out for me in this was the notification. So every other time that we make changes to the city, or that a resident can be impacted by decisions around, we just saw it up here earlier this evening, where we put the streets in, how we zone, how we rezone. It impacts current residents as well. And a lot of people will stand right here and talk about that, how it impacts them. And what we're saying in this proposal right now is, there is something that may happen in your neighborhood. In fact, it might happen right, left, across the street behind you, because anybody could be qualified to have a short-term rental. And the nature of your neighborhood can change without you being made aware until the license is made available. And in most other cases, the city allows for notification when a license is pursued. And I don't think you'd go down the road, there would be inconsistency if we did that, to say, we will allow a license or a permit, and not tell anyone until it's a done deal. And I think to say, here is what, you know, and if this passes, everybody knows that it could be near them, but just the notification at the moment of the application rather than after it's approved, I think would be really appreciated. And I second the feeling that while short-term rentals generally everywhere, and maybe particularly in Utah, go really well, there aren't that many problems, there are not zero problems. And there will not be zero problems in Mapleton. Maybe there are none so far, I don't know. Apparently there are places that are participating as Airbnbs. But if we open that up, there won't be zero problems. And so enforcement and really kind of keeping that down and reminding people we are Mapleton after all. And we know what that means. And you're welcome to come here. But we want to make sure that we can enforce that. I think that's great to put in here. I would recommend holding on some things until we add a little, we firm up some more angles on potential violations. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Rick.
John Legge, 1078 North, 1800 East. If this meeting was held maybe a year ago, I might have a completely different opinion than I do. I didn't know that there was any short-term rentals or any Airbnbs allowed in Mapleton. At least that's what I was told when I came into the office a couple of times. My wife, Debbie, and I had two unique experiences. One, we had a property at 630 North, 1600 East that we were doing a lease to own with. those individuals chose to go ahead and illegally put the property out on VRBO and Airbnb without our knowledge. We found out after the fact. The reason why we found out after the fact is we got multiple phone calls from our neighbors of the impact that they had from the parties that were going on. And I think, I'm hoping you're being joking about multiple parties, because, 2 nights in a row? Okay. Because at this house at 630 North 1600 East, they partied every night that they were there. The police were called 4 times to the residence. It was rented 5 times before we found out. 4 of those times, the police were called for parties, excessive parking, excessive noise, litter. That was at 630 North 1600 East. Worst, we live in a subdivision, Maple Glen Estates. So question, if you live in a subdivision that has CCNRs that say that you can't do short-term rentals, does that potentially trump the Airbnb? It does? That's good, okay. So our next door neighbor put their property out on Airbnb. We were told at first that it was just family and friends that were showing up, but as the license plates kept changing from California to Arizona to Nevada to you name it, we knew something was going on. And in multiple cases, well, in fact, every single time they rented that property, they left. And so it was left up to the neighbors to have to patrol what was going on there. The police were called twice. One time it was because they rented out, they're having a shooting competition up at the Kilpack Range, and they were having high-powered air rifle competitions up there. Well, there was a bunch of people that not only rented the casita, but they rented the main residence, and they set up targets in the back of the yard and were doing high-powered air rifle target shooting while our grandsons were playing in our backyard. We don't have a solid fence between us. We have a metal fence that's between us with open slats, and if any of those things could have potentially ricocheted, I don't know what could have happened. So the police were called on that incident. I believe at that time there was 3 of the police officers that showed up. I know that at the other residence there was all hands on deck. Anybody that was on duty that night got called to the 630 North 1600 East residence. The other impact is parking. Each and every time that our neighbors rented, there was, quite a few cars that would show up. And also, I thought that Mapleton, that these homes are approved to be single-family dwellings. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So if you rent on Airbnb or VRBO, like it was brought up earlier, and you have multiple families showing up to share a residence, is that now changing that to a multiple family dwelling at that point in time? I don't know, just a question. It seems like it would. So that should be, I would imagine, a clear violation as well. The other thing is when we've had people there, they've called in food trucks, and so you've got the impact of the neighborhood of that. So I just want to share my experience that I didn't know that this was ever going to be an issue, would be an issue. I thought Airbnb would be a good thing. But our experience is it's been a huge impact, not only to us and our family, but also to our neighbors. And I think that using an example of who I think kind of does it right is St. George used to, as a city, allow Airbnb, VRBO. They've kind of shut that down, and they've now created developments that are specifically for short-term rentals. I think that's an amazing idea. If you want to have short-term rentals, and it's in a specific subdivision that's been approved for that, everybody that's in there is expecting multiple vehicles, multiple families, things like that going on. When you're living in a subdivision with your family and with your neighbors, and you have these people that are transient coming in and out, that is not, in my opinion, that is not conducive to a quiet neighborhood that you live with your family. That is a transient neighborhood. And there should be, if you're going to approve it, I think there should be specific neighborhoods that are set up that are built to go and handle those things. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can see both sides, but I do think that Mapleton is such a small town with how many police officers? If you have it all over the city, how are you going to handle that? Like, That's what I think of. Plus, the street that I live on is 1600 East. There's no, you can't even walk down the road because you're on the street or you're in the field. There's nowhere to go. Like, where would, if people on our street did it, there'd be nowhere to park, it seems like. Anyway, so there's a resource, I guess, national something, here, it's a guide for governments across the country. It's a federal.org thing you can look up, and they have all these suggestions, but they're for really big cities, like looking at San Diego and big cities like that. So I would just say, would we need to get more police officers? Because I don't want to be, I don't look at what my neighbors are doing. I don't want to worry about what's going on at my neighbors. I just live here. Does that make sense? So I don't want to, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dan Barton. This is my wife, Janet. We live in the Silverleaf subdivision. Since 2020, we've been Airbnb providers, I guess you might say. And I just wanted to say we did that because that's when COVID hit. And our business, we're digital printers. We actually have our business at home, as Cherie knows. Our business literally stopped overnight because of the COVID restrictions and shutdowns. And that's why we looked into doing Airbnb. And without that, who knows where we would be. We may not even be here this evening. So one thing that I would like to recommend, well, first of all, it seems to me like the potential problems or existing problems fall between owner-occupied Airbnbs and those that rent out their whole home. I've looked at the map. If you go onto VRBO or Airbnb, you can see what the listings are for the city of Mapleton and adjacent areas. You can see how many homes are being rented out versus, like us, it's just a finished apartment that we rent out. In 2020, we rented out, I went today and looked, I think it was 121 days. Never had a single problem with any of those. Like I heard from someone else, we've had people coming in that were dropping children off at the MTC. We're here for general conference, bringing children for BYU. Tomorrow we have somebody, an elderly couple that's staying with us as they prepare to go into the MTC. So we have all of the requirements that I've seen. We've got parking off the street and all of that. I think that I couldn't tell you how many properties already meet these proposed ordinances, but I would ask that you might take that into consideration, specifically the 90-day limitation. In our case, that would have been a big financial hit for us. So if we can meet your other ordinances, I'm all for it, but I would recommend extending that 90-day limitation. Janet brought to my attention that Airbnb and VRBO, the two biggest listing companies out there, do have provisions for what are called party houses. If neighbors are upset with what's going on in that facility, they can contact Airbnb or VRBO, and that property will be delisted. They will no longer be able to be listed as part of their services. So there are some things in place already to address those issues.
As well as the taxes that are sent to the city are handled by those companies as well. They're collecting that.
Local taxes will be collected by Airbnb and VRBO. That just needs to be set up. It's not a difficult thing to do. So yes, it would be a revenue stream if that's one of the reasons why you're looking at it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yes.
Anybody have questions for this applicant or this resident, since they
Resident, yeah.
they're actual
resident, whatever.
Airbnb short-term rentals in the city?
Dan, since you do have an actual Airbnb, are there rules that you would say that you would like to see imposed in an ordinance if we did go forward?
I think some of the issues that are addressed are alleviated when you have owner occupied. We're there, we know what's going on, we have security cameras, we know who's going in and out. I've had people bring in additional people they didn't tell me about, that I could call them on, because I can see that. You've also got, I think not parking on the street is another one. It has less impact on the city if it's on, your own driveway. So I could see those being reasonable.
Okay.
I have a question for you. You say you have an apartment that you're renting?
It's a finished basement.
A finished basement. What would be the impact to you if you were to switch that from a short-term rental to a long-term rental?
We don't get a lot of long-term rental requests. It's mainly short-term through these two agencies, VRBO and Airbnb, if that's what you're asking.
I'm asking now, if you just were to use it strictly as a long-term rental and not as a short-term rental, what are the advantages for you in doing it as a short-term versus as a true long-term rental, where you have someone that actually lives and becomes part of the community while they're staying with you?
Well, I'll let you finish, but to me, the first thing that comes to mind is your rent goes down as the extended stay goes up. So theoretically, in my mind, if we can do 10 two-day rentals as opposed to one 20-day rental, we as the Airbnb hosts would make more revenue that way.
We like the flexibility as well for the use. There's been times when our own children have needed that space, and so to be able to control when the timing of those needs, as well as if we're gonna be out of town, that we can just block off those days so that nobody's in our home that we're not aware of or not there to oversee.
So I guess what she's saying is we have a lot of control over who comes in the house, how they behave. We've never had anyone misbehave.
And we screen everybody that's coming. You can go and look at their reviews, see their past history with renting, and know who's coming in your home.
And if they should have a bad past, you know it beforehand, and you can just flat out deny their coming into your place.
So if I understood you right, the advantages that you listed were, one, that financially it's more advantageous for you to do short-term versus long-term.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the second is it gives you some more flexibility in terms of allowing your kids to stay or whether or not you go on vacation. Is that correct?
To me, that's the most important one, is the flexibility. I guess if you had long-term, you'd have that consistent income where you don't have a guaranteed short-term, and especially if it's restricted to 90 days.
Yeah. So at this point, you've been doing that, and it's not a permitted use in the city, right? How have your neighbors reacted to it? Have you had any concerns?
Most of them didn't even know when they found out.
Okay.
Well, I talk to our immediate neighbors across the street and on the sides and tell them when we have somebody coming in. But again, the people that come to us are so low-key, it's just never been an
So
issue.
you're being a good neighbor and working with your neighbors, and they
Yeah,
know
it's not like we're hiding it.
Yeah.
We want them to feel like they're kind of in on our experience.
Most of them say, "Oh, how are you doing that?" And that's great.
Yeah, and most of them, well, some of them will at least say, "Yeah, how are you doing that?"
What kind of group sizes do you see? Is it typically just a couple of people, small families?
Between 1 and 2 people.
We only have a one-bedroom,
one.
so we have restricted that just because we don't have sleeping accommodations.
Yeah.
So,
I have looked on the listings, and there are at least a few homes, big homes here, that are listed, the whole home for rent, several $1,000s a night, as opposed to our meager, $100 a night.
It's TJ's neighbors.
Thank you. Appreciate your answering our questions.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, my name's Trent Ride, and I actually am for short-term rentals. I've owned several short-term rentals in Phoenix and Las Vegas and everywhere. The only comment that I'm going to make is this, and that is to stand up here and say you're not going to have issues is really BS. You will have issues, and people, there'll be there's going to be different problems that arise, like this gentleman talking about. My only question to the city would be, if it's illegal to be doing this in the city right now, today, and there actually is a lot of our Airbnb or VRBO available in Mapleton. right now that you can go online and look at. But if it's not permitted right now and people are doing it and it hasn't been monitored, then what does the city plan on doing for monitoring the future if you legalize it? That's really what it boils down to. So if it's not getting monitored now and people are freely standing up here saying, hey, I'm doing it, what are they going to do when it comes to monitoring the problems? I think the lady in the back had some great comments about making sure that the verbiage is good and that it's right, and that, again, that then the city does actually do something about it when there is an issue. I think most of the rentals that I have experienced have been really good people. The ones that I have had, I have not lived in my homes or in my rental properties. They've been, they weren't owner-occupied. If you really do enforce the owner-occupied side, I don't think you're going to have any issues. But that's going to be very difficult for the city to enforce. It just is. How are you going to possibly know whether the owner is occupied there while people are renting their place? How are you also going to possibly know? I agree with the fact you do away, if this does become a part of the city code, you need to do away with the 90-day thing, simply because how are you going to monitor the 90 days? That's impossible. So I think sometimes when we plan in the city, we put verbiage and stuff in because we want to put it in to make everyone feel comfortable and feel good. Hey, we're going to do this and we're going to monitor that. In reality, it's impossible. So I think with the city council, it needs to be suggested that when they do adopt this, which I think they should, that they really need to put things into place that are able to be monitored. And a 90-day is not able to be monitored. Owner-occupied is going to be very difficult to monitor. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
My name is Shiloh Sorensen. I've been in front of this council plenty of times over the years for different reasons. I really believe in the short-term rental option. The owner-occupied, I understand that it's going to be very hard to enforce or even know, but that really will mitigate a lot of the other problems we're talking about. A lot of the parties and the excessive noise and the excessive damage and the impact on the neighbors, right? Mapleton is a good place for families. It's a good place for homes. It's a good place for people to feel comfortable. And if you're a good owner and you are renting your place, you're not going to want to, if you're there, alienate your whole neighborhood, your friends. These people, I mean, let's be honest, our wards are 6 blocks around. We all know everybody within our spaces, within reason. So we have a close relationship. This isn't a place where you don't know your neighbors. This is a place where you know your neighbors, and your neighbors know you, and they're going to talk, and they're going to have conversations. And if there's a problem, they will bring it to your attention. The one thing that I thought as I sat back there was the restrictions when you get a business license. So this is kind of a funny one to bring up, but daycares are allowed to be put pretty much anywhere in the city. They're in all kinds of the residential areas. Daycares have 20, 30 cars every morning drop off. They have 20, 30 cars every evening pick up. If you want to talk about a traffic issue or a situation, that doesn't get addressed for daycares. When you're talking about 2 or 3 cars parking, we're not talking about 2 different things. So we got to kind of balance this out. I believe that it probably should be a homeowner business license in which you are defining with the city what you're planning on doing. If you have a basement apartment and it has two rooms in it, you're defining that. I have 2 rooms that I want to rent out. I could have the maximum of 2 cars parked. I have places for 2 cars off the street, and I have 2 rooms, and that's your business license. That's your short-term business license. If you have a larger home with larger places to park cars, it shouldn't be restricted by that same thing. So if it was based on a business license perspective, you would have to make a proposal, and you would have to come get approval for that. And just like they said in one of the previous comments, in a business license proposal, normally all the neighbors are notified that this business is, that we're asking to put a business in this area. But by doing that, we can not define for everyone the 90 days or the 2 people per room or this many parking stalls. We can't encompass, there's no way to do this for everyone. It's going to be individualized, and if you're going to allow this to happen, and I believe that the city council should, then that type of application would probably alleviate the majority of these concerns and these issues, right? If it's a basement and you can have 2 cars off the street, great, have your basement 2 cars off the street. You can't rent it to 40 people, but you can rent it to X. If you have, when I have a large home that eventually may become a short-term rental, but I live at the end of a cul-de-sac and I own an acre, and I could park 40 cars in the acre if I wanted to. I wouldn't do that, but my situation would be much different than theirs. And so to blanket the rules over the city, when you're talking about individuals that are trying to do it, it's going to be cumbersome, and it's going to be unenforceable, like you said, and hard to define. If we did it a little more specific as a business license, a short-term business license, you could have a little more control, a little more insight of what is going to happen in that place, how many people, how many cars, how many, what potentially could happen. I believe that short-term rentals, this isn't an if, it's a when. And if we do it correctly, it can be a very positive thing. Like they're saying, I've rented them for 5, 8 years. Weddings, funerals, family reunions, graduations, and then business trips sometimes. But that's why they get rented. And one more comment that didn't get addressed in the long-term versus short-term theory. As I'm a landlord and I have properties that I rent. As a landlord, short-term is so much easier normally on your property than long-term. Long-term, they come in, they bring all of their stuff, they go in, and you're not in and out of that room, that home every 2 days, 3 days, right? You're lucky to get in there once a month. They can beat up your property. You don't know till they're gone what has actually happened. So in my experience, the short-term rentals are usually much more respectful than the long-term rentals. The long-term rentals, like, we own this place. We rent it, it's ours. And they treat it like that. Short-term rentals like, oh, we're grateful to be here for a short period of time. We come with our suitcases, we leave with our suitcases. That's all they bring, and that's all they take. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, make it brief, thank you.
So 2 quick observations. One, we're talking about potentially allowing this and putting some restrictions around it. But in the comments that I just heard, there's already people, it's already against ordinance within Mapleton not to have short-term rentals. People are already doing it. They're already breaking the rules. They're already doing things outside of what they're supposed to do. And so what's going to stop them if it does get passed and there are parameters put around it to continue to break those rules? They're already shown that they're doing it, and they're fine saying it in front of everybody. That's number one. Number two, I'm all about people making money and income. I get up, go to work, make my money, come home. I don't think I have a real negative impact on my neighbors in the area that I live in Mapleton. I understand that the vast majority of the people that are wanting to do this, it's for income. I get that. I can appreciate that. But for what impact? For what impact to Mapleton, to the community, to the neighbors, and to everything and everybody else? So again, I'm all for income, but not if it has negative impact on where you live.
Thank you. One more quick brief comment to add to your previous comments.
It feels like instead of regulating, it feels like there's like 2 camps where the impact to other people is worth regulating, but the impact to your property should be up to them. So if this is happening where people are having huge parties and parking all over the street, noise control, parking, exterior to the property, that would be what I think regulation would be called for. To me, it seems to separate. The business license sounds like a great way to control that without too many limitations.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Going once, going twice, gone. So we will close public comment and we will open, oh, sorry, you have something, Sean?
Yeah, I'll try to go through a couple of these items. First of all, on the legality and the enforcement, it's a little bit of a complicated topic. The Supreme Court of Utah has determined that if a city ordinance does not specifically state that short-term rentals are not permitted, then they are permitted. And so that's why part of this is if we decide that we don't want them, we need to codify an ordinance that says they're not permitted. As far as owner-occupied, the intent of what was written was that the property itself has to contain a residence that the owner lives in. Doesn't mean they need to be there when the rental happens. Now, that could be something you want to change, but that's very easily enforceable. They have to apply for a license. They have to demonstrate that that is their primary residence. You can verify it on tax records on the county. So that portion is very, very easy to enforce. They're absolutely right that the number of days and the parking and all of that is not all that easy to enforce, especially on in a city that has very little staff. And unfortunately, things are often have to be complaint-based, and that's not a great solution. But we just don't have the ability, no matter whether we're regulating those that exist now that shouldn't, or whether we've approved a permit and we're regulating the standards of those ordinances. That's a complicated thing for every city to deal with, is the personnel to do it. The way we've tried to do it is to have, as far as the number of days restriction, there is, they have to provide evidence on request with penalty of perjury that, yes, they're complying with that. So if we had a complaint or a concern, hey, somebody is renting this property for more days than they're supposed to, we could request very easily. Airbnb, right, produces your records of number of days stayed. That's an easy thing to produce if you're a property owner, to demonstrate, yes, this is how I've complied, right? So that's one of the topics. As far as enforcement in general, we certainly could look at changing the ordinance or making that more clear. That no issues in looking over those standards. Trying to work through here, see if there's any other major issues we needed to address.
Alan, did you get your question answered on B5 and B6? Is it on the same property?
Yes. So those are.
But they're two different entities. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, they'd have to be a residential unit. So you'd have to have an approved, either you have a single family dwelling or you've got an accessory apartment that's been approved, that's a living space.
So then yes, they can.
Yeah. So if you have, I think the example that the family that's doing it now, they live upstairs, they're renting their basement, right? That's, they're owner occupied in the resident. There's many people that have like a detached garage with an apartment upstairs. Yes, that would, under the draft ordinance, that would be an option for them to rent that out up to those 90 days. But again, don't worry about hurting our feelings at all on this ordinance. If you think it's all terrible, scrap it, let's start over. We are, this is just to get the conversation going. I think for us, the primary thing we were trying to do is say, okay, if our general plan says we want to keep commercial and residential areas to be incidental, then how do we do that and make it work? So,
can I share a comment? I think I have the unique position of being the only one here in this place that actually has lived next door to the two legal Airbnbs, and it doesn't come without an impact. There are times when my family has tried to sit down and do something as a family, and the noise from the Airbnb precludes that. Trying to contact the owners of the Airbnb doesn't work. And so we're left with the issue of we just don't get to do our family activity, or we call the police and try to make a big hullabaloo about it. And so the majority of times there isn't an issue, but there are plenty of times when it is an issue to our family. It has been an issue to our family. And the onus becomes on us as the resident to be the one policing someone else's income. And it's pretty frustrating at times. I really think that the short-term rental ordinance is a solution looking for a problem. We've already heard that there are people that are doing it within their neighborhood, and neighbors aren't complaining. As soon as we make this an ordinance on the books, as Sean has pointed out, now we have to enforce it, and there's our problem. How do we enforce it? And you're gonna always have problems, and it's gonna disrupt the neighbors. When people move to Mapleton, they move here because it's a rural community, and they want to have a certain feel. When you buy in here, and it says that any commercial use that should be allowed should be incidental. And it shouldn't detract from the nature of the feel of the community. And my experience has been it does distract. Not all the time, but it does distract. And again, so I think that by allowing them, we're creating a solution that really is a problem.
I think Sean's got this up on the screen, these recommendations, I think to help facilitate the conversation, to not go into a whole bunch of deep conversations about this. As a commission, we look at this and we go, okay, number one, are we ready to accept short-term rentals in Mapleton, or are we ready to reject it? Number three, I don't think is an option for us to consider. I don't think with the wording we have here, with the comments from the public, we're ready to take all that information and put down amendments to the certain, all the codes required for short-term rentals. Or the fourth option, which I see personally right now as the best option, is to continue the application with requests for changes or more information, taking all the comments that Sean's got from the public. I think Loretta gave some really good recommendations to look at other cities. I've been to short-term rentals throughout the country, and I think looking at what works and what doesn't work would be a great opportunity for the city to get it right, because we have one chance to get this right. Take all the comments that we have, continue the application, get additional feedback. I don't know if it makes sense to do another special city work session with public comments, or where they can take a citizen-wide survey that's sent out through social media where all the public can put things together, make recommendations, taking all the comments from tonight. So personally, I think as a commission, if we look at it as these 4 items and make the recommendation to do 1, 2, or 4, my vote would be to continue the application with requests for more changes, more information from the staff, take more public comment, take the information we've heard from those who have short-term rentals in Mapleton and those who have visited short-term rentals, and look at other city codes, North Salt Lake, St. George, Santa Clara.
I want to know Alpines.
Alpine outlawed it.
Did they?
Yeah.
So
They presented it, and then they decided, instead of leaving it open, like you say, they decided to not have that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as Jake. I think the comments that have been made tonight have been amazing, and it's good to be able to take all of that at this point and use that to help make some better decisions, and to the point, get this right the first time. So I'm willing to make a motion, but go ahead, Jesse.
I was just going to say, in my career, I've spent a lot of time in a lot of different city council meetings throughout the country, and I've seen that this is something that cities grapple with all over. And it is a genie that you better get right before you let out of the bottle, because once you unveil it, then it's hard to wrangle that one back in. So I just want to say, this is something that we need to be very cognizant of, and that we get it right as much as we can from the very beginning, because what you set in stone, then all of a sudden that's the way it is, and then all suddenly anybody who adopts that is then grandfathered in. So.
Yeah, if the position of the commission is to continue with the request for changes, I think we would just need some direction on what those would be, because we've, you know, the public comment, there's a pretty wide variety of comments that were received in which direction for us to go, and I think that we would need some more direction on specifics.
I'd like to get Chief Jackson's input too.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, is there an opportunity here to have some type of working session on this outside of this meeting tonight?
Sure.
I mean, because, I mean, we could be here till midnight talking about all the specifics. I think, you know, if we really want to dive into all of this, and I know that there's others that still want to talk further with staff about this, I think we need some time to take all of that in, and I think we can put, you know, some more specific information down on paper outside of this meeting tonight.
Yep, we can certainly do a work session. Hmm?
I do think it's pretty interesting that even though we did have plenty of comments emailed in that went both ways, the majority, the clear majority tonight is in favor. With some good guidelines and restrictions, which I actually, before kind of looking into this further, and tonight, I kind of was a little leery of it because of the things that I read said. There is a decline in the social construct of neighborhoods and towns after these vacation rentals come in. But I think now, maybe, that maybe those are the ones that are the full-time without the owner-occupant. I don't know for sure, but it does seem like there's not a short, from what I read, there's not a short-term noticeable difference. It's more of a long-term effect. And maybe, yeah, from what TJ said, that is the truth.
In our situation, both of them were people that did not live in the community. And it
that
does
is a
negatively
difference
impact
then.
the community. And so I think if we do open it up, that having owner occupied is definitely an improvement on the situation we've been in. But having said that, like, both times these rentals have been, like, one existed and then didn't exist and another one came in, it causes an angst within the neighborhood. It does not improve the social connectivity of the neighborhood. That's been my experience.
So if there was an individual process, a per application process to go through to determine that, and maybe they have to come to the planning commission, then would you be more inclined, TJ? To look at each property one by one and not have a general?
So my feeling on that is that from the comments that we got online and from the comments we got here, there's just so many opinions on how it should be done.
Sure.
And so you're never going to satisfy everyone, and so it's always going to be a bit of an angst within the community. However, if people are doing it anyway, and they do it responsibly, no one seems to care. That's been your experience here. As soon as we open it up, though, then the neighbors can't have a say in it. Then they have to police it. If you have responsible people that are just doing it, then they're really still tied into the community. They have to be, or it gets shut down.
There's no way to police that, so to speak, other than just city
resources.
ordinances.
You just have to dedicate more resources.
Police all zones, not just this one zone, but I think we're at a point.
So as soon as you open it up, then you have all these issues, and you're going to have people that are upset. And in our experience, it did not help our community. But that was not an owner-occupied one, so it's not the same as what we've heard from the two people that own it.
Right.
I would probably guess a lot of the issues with yours too were based on the size.
Yes.
Right? I mean, they're huge groups
Big
that
houses.
can come. which is what we were, one of the things.
But it's not just that, like, we had a bunch of, like, you know, 6 guys that showed up, a bunch of bros that were selling summer sales, and they had their big party, and they introduced my kids to some language and music that I was trying not to listen to. So, I mean, it's just, and if they were my neighbors, I would just say, hey, Carl, can you turn that down or change the music?
Right.
But they're not.
Right.
And they don't have to listen to me.
Yeah. I wish we had this good of a turnout when we were talking about low and moderate income housing initiatives.
Which,
But
actually, you lead right into one comment that I want to make regarding to real estate, and that is that these types of units do contribute to the decline in the numbers of available listings for sale, which is a problem.
Yeah, and to Cherie's point too on that is they also, moderate income housing is a real problem, and we've been trying to increase that, and these compete with that. So this isn't, to adopt this ordinance competes with something we're also trying to improve in our city.
Yeah,
And the city, or
And
the
the-
state's
and
trying to
those-
mandate us to adopt that as well.
Yeah, the state requires that
Have
we do it, so.
mandated it.
Yeah,
Not
the interesting
trying to,
thing is
yeah.
for the last several years, the state has been very much, cities, you shouldn't be regulating these short-term rentals. And now that issue is coming up more and more as, wait a second, there's 10, 20,000 units of available affordable housing that's no longer on the market because of this. So, yeah, the state's going to continue to take this up in legislative sessions. I'm sure this year there will be some legislation.
If the state gives us some guidance on that, then we could address it at that point. But again, like if we bring them into the community now, we not only hurt our moderate income housing plan that we're trying to push, but we create tension. That's just the way it is. The fact that we got so many comments speaks to the fact that there's tension.
Yeah, I think a work session is in order, for sure. Be great to really dig into the weeds on
Is
this.
number one not on the, if number one is not an option, then that's what we would move to, is to have the commission direct us on that.
I mean, in the same breath, I say we need more actual dwellings for people to live in, but then I can appreciate the Bartons' perspective and their needs and wants as well, with not wanting someone there full-time.
So Sean, once again, this is just a recommendation to the city council. So we're recommending that we continue this application, or talking about continuing this application, so that the city council also has input in changes and more information, and maybe adapt a citizen work session to get more input.
Yeah, you can
Citizen
do it a couple of
commission?
different ways. You can continue it and require any draft to come back to you, and then that could go to the council and they could reverse it, right, or change it. Or your recommendation could be, you recommend that the council take more steps to, including a potential work session. It could even be a joint work session to evaluate the ordinance in more detail on the public's interest in it.
I like that idea.
Yeah, I do as well.
Be good to get all of us together for a change.
Well, I might throw a bomb in that and just say, let's just deal with number one, and I'll put out a proposal, a recommendation to City Council that we not allow short-term rentals. The one's off the table.
Yeah, I don't know.
Any second?
I think,
Is there a second? Yeah, we have a motion by TJ. Is there a second?
That's a motion, yeah, sorry.
With not a second, we can't move forward with that recommendation. I'm sorry, TJ.
it's hard,
It makes it
TJ.
clear we can go forward now. Let's, yeah. So 4 is
I
our,
think-
4 is our option then.
I appreciate your perspective too, but I just feel like there's definitely a push to have this, and there's definitely interest in it. We've seen here tonight.
It would probably be more productive to recommend to the council that the council take certain steps to do more research and outreach, rather than you continuing it, us doing a bunch of work, coming back to you, then going to them, and them
Yeah.
taking a different approach. So that's probably where I would be leaning, but whatever.
I'll make a motion to continue the application with the request for changes and more information from the city council and public input for this item.
So the recommendation would be that the council review it, but continue it.
But continue it, yes.
With the request.
You do want them to put it on the agenda for next week?
It wouldn't be next week.
Wouldn't be on the agenda.
No.
We would continue it, so it wouldn't go to the council, but the council would have directive to take steps to get public input.
So this would come back to us.
Correct.
At some point, yeah.
If the council,
If the council
decides.
took that, yeah.
And I don't know if it's possible, but I would like to see some examples of other cities who have done it right. And I don't know how that's.
Successful.
Yeah.
luck
We've
with it.
we've looked at quite a few, and that's
If you've
where
got like a
this
Rolodex
came
of
from.
city
Yeah,
managers.
Yeah, that's
A
how
lot
they
of
done
this
it,
came from those.
yeah. So that's where a lot of this came from. What's hard is because just because it works in Sandy or St. George doesn't mean it's what we should do or what's. So we've
Sure.
taken these bits and pieces for sure.
What's kind of challenging is the cities that, it's a destination, right? They've got standards that wouldn't really apply here. And more cities that are like us, most of them have done kind of what we've done, is just kind of out of sight, out of mind, right? They're happening, but it's not such a big destination location that it becomes a major issue, so.
And that's my opinion, that's what I said. By adopting this ordinance, we are creating a problem.
Then you're opening.
Yes.
And you're giving
It's a solution that creates a
permission.
problem. Whereas if we just say we're not going to do
But
them, people are
sleeping-
going to still do them, but if they do them responsibly, it's not an issue. And we've heard a couple examples of that today.
Well, it's not allow them, meaning we're not allowing them. If they're doing it, they're breaking the law.
But
Well,
people are
no.
still going to do that. People are doing that right now. And
They're not
Oh, so
breaking
you're
the law
not
right now
saying that we
because it's not on
don't
the
allow
books.
them, you're just saying we leave it alone?
Yes.
And neither yay nor nay, yeah.
And what's the implication of that? Just continue to have the status quo?
Mhm.
And what's the trade-off?
We don't have that option, though.
We don't have the option of
What's
leaving
been
it
brought-
alone?
It's been brought to the city, right, Sean? So we either allow them, don't allow them, adopt
Yeah.
changes, or continue it, meaning it's an ordinance that's still being considered. But those that are running the short-term rentals right now aren't breaking the law. They're not breaking the zoning ordinances. They can continue to do it.
They technically are, though, aren't they? Because it's supposed to be a single-family dwelling, and they're
Well, no,
allowing more
that's
people.
what Sean said earlier.
That's the tricky part, right? That the decision by the Supreme Court of Utah argues differently than what I think than that argument would.
okay.
So
Thank
what we need to do is if the commission and the council decide we don't want them, it needs to be explicitly
I know.
stated in the ordinance.
So to your point, though, if we had adopted number one, then that would essentially put something in force, which would thereby prohibit any of them.
If someone's doing it and they're being,
Yeah.
they're creating a problem, then it gets shut down
Yeah.
with number one. If they're doing it and it's not a problem, then no one knows about it, except for the neighbors.
I don't think, is that right? I would think if we do number one, it's outlawed. So
Yeah,
then,
so I
if
think
they're
what-
doing it, then they get fined or penalized. It's not allowed.
Yeah, I think what TJ's saying is if you had said they're not allowed, people may still do it, and if it's done in a way that doesn't come to our attention, the city wouldn't take enforcement action. But
So are we saying, is it true? If we have to say yes or no, we can't just leave it status quo?
if we don't say no in the ordinance, we're at risk of not having the ability to take enforcement action when there are problems.
Okay. I would have thought that was the direction you wanted to go, TJ.
Yeah,
Is that?
yeah.
Leave it status quo.
No, to
say no.
Yeah, because then if someone's doing it and it's not, it's causing a disruption to their community, it can be stopped.
Okay.
But
Well-
we're saying no to something, knowing that people are doing it. So are we
Yeah.
not being good?
So it's the same thing as the accessory apartments. People do those without taking out a permit, okay? It goes on, so.
If the city becomes aware that that's happened, you take enforcement action.
Exactly. It's the exact same as that.
So then I circle back to, like that we've talked about tonight, and what I firmly believe, private property rights should exist. So I think, yes, we should allow people to do things with their property if they're not impacting others. So I don't know what that looks like at this point, but obviously you're impacted, so those people need to cease and desist.
And by allowing it, does it allow us to keep the, what's the verbiage in the ordinance for our community? It says that,
Well, there is no ordinance now.
well, yeah, there is. It says, to ensure commercial use that allow for residential zones are incidental to the main residential or agricultural use and do not negatively impact the quality of rural atmosphere of the area. That's, when people buy to Mapleton, that's what they're buying into. Are we protecting that by allowing this ordinance to go forward? And my experience is, if we let these in, we're actually not helping maintain, we're not really bringing that to fruition. Yeah. And we won't. If you look at communities, that they become more and more popular. It doesn't increase that fill. Yeah. So that's part of the property right that we need to make sure we're, I mean, that is the property right.
You want, yes, you
What
should
we're
have
trying to
property
do
rights,
is
but
add
the
something to
people
it.
around you should as well.
Yeah,
Peace and enjoyment.
yes.
Mhm.
And so we have to make sure that we're keeping with that.
If we did adopt an ordinance, those people would not be within their rights anymore, so that could positively affect you, because they are not owner-occupied, right?
No, they're grandfathered. So the one that exists is grandfathered in, so it wouldn't be affected. It would still, as long as they maintain.
Is that true?
Yes. It's got a permit. As long as they kept within the bounds of the agreement originally, they would
Gotcha.
still be able to do it.
Gotcha.
So my experience isn't going to go away.
Sure.
What I'm saying is that for other people in Mapleton, I don't think this is in their best interest. It hasn't positively affected our community.
Did you talk to the chief of police?
He hasn't reviewed the specifics of the ordinance,
But you didn't ask him for comment on his experience?
no, we certainly, I mean, I've talked to him about these, not particularly about this ordinance tonight.
And he gets calls from us. So it's,
You know.
to say that there hasn't been anyone reporting that that's not correct. He gets calls.
But he's getting calls right now on a legal short-term rental.
Yeah, it's a legal one, but he's going to get more calls if we allow more legal ones.
Sure.
Yeah, then it'll just be
And-
enforceable standards.
And this idea of enforceable, it becomes a problem. Like, what is he to do?
What is he to do if we say no short-term rentals and people continue to do it?
Well, we can actually shut them down, right? We have legal recourse to stop it. It's pretty defined. But if they do it responsibly, then it's not an issue.
They just can't fly under the radar.
What's that?
They just fly under the radar?
Exactly.
So you're probably back to, we had a
I don't think we
kind of a
wanna allow
motion, I'm
people-
not sure.
I don't know where
I don't
we're
think we
at.
want to encourage that, though. I think if,
I don't want to encourage that, but that's the reality. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. If we stop them, they're still going to happen.
What's hard with these
We
two is
have
we
legal-
can't monitor them by going and looking on the website either.
Yeah.
So the state says we can't do that, so it'd be strictly
Oh,
on.
really?
It would be
well, they-
neighbors saying, this is a problem, and then we'd have to go deal with it.
Right.
there's nothing on the books, so technically they're not breaking the law as
Right.
it is right now.
They're not breaking the law.
And if we adopt number one, they would be breaking the law. If we continue it, they continue to operate a short-term rental that is legal because there's no ordinances on the books.
The neighbors.
And I would tend to disagree with there's nothing on the books because I went to Sean in both cases with the police department and letters were given to the people that were living there to shut that Airbnb down. And they had a specific amount of time and they shut it down.
And that was
Yeah.
before
Those were
the
the legal
Supreme
ones.
Court decisions, I think, was probably the situation, but.
I think what he's referring to is additional circumstances where if suddenly we're saying no on-street parking, only 2 people per room, no noise after, like, then there's suddenly all these additional hurdles that are then enforceable. That's what we're talking about is, do we add additional layers to this?
They're not really that enforceable, though.
Yeah.
There's a certain number of people that can stay in the one next to us, and good luck counting.
We have these same
heads.
certain enforceable rules
Counting
on
cars.
accessory apartments that we're not monitoring either.
Yeah.
So it
But
goes.
it's, the accessory apartments are kind of a different thing than a short-term rental. Those are actually, we need to have those because the state has said we need a moderate income thing. We don't need these. This is something that we're doing because.
Well, it sounds like the Bartons need it. Some people, I think, would argue
But
that.
they could still do a long-term rental. So we're not taking away their
Sure,
ability to
sure.
make income. So we're still giving them that option.
Sure,
And again, that's an option that we need in our city.
I agree. I
Did
personally.
we have a motion from Jake? or
Yeah,
did we
I
not?
think I would.
We did remember if we were.
Blooming and then.
Are
If
you-
he had it, or
Are
or
you
if it was
standing
float.
by your motion?
I still stand by, yeah, I think that we need more information, just as blanket a no, I think doesn't take the entire city into consideration, because there are half the public here and the comments I've received from emails that are for it, but the people did bring up more conditions that they would like to see. Then there's the other half that say, no, let's just outlaw them, per TJ's point, so I think there's not enough information for
Yeah.
us to make a decision, yes or no, at this
And
point.
I think if we consider this, then obviously we're going to consider it with conditions. And I think that we really need the person who's going to enforce the conditions to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say I second your motion with adding to it that
Chief
the
Jackson.
council and Chief Jackson and the commission all have a work session together.
Sean, what would be the impact to the city in terms of the amount of extra work that this would create for you?
It's tough to tell until you know how many applications come in.
With
But they're-
for example, we've had 2 now in the city. How much work has that created for you?
Well,
You know, the approval process, that takes a little bit of time, but not, I mean, it's not a daily issue.
So it's,
This be considered a conditional use permit where an application has to be presented before the planning commission, or
Wouldn't-
can anybody just open one up tomorrow?
As drafted, it would be a business license, so it's
So they would have to have a
administrative.
business license.
But we
Is that
wouldn't
a
have to keep it that way.
Is it a burden to the city, or does it add more stress to take Rick Silva's comment to, if an application does get brought before the city, that the neighbors around it can be notified? So that they
Yeah,
have-
we do notify in many instances, but we don't notify in many others, right? There are things like building permits and accessory apartment permits and business licenses that aren't notified. This was intended to just allow for the public to know that something's going on, but we can do it however you see fit. The concern, not the concern, but one of the issues that comes up, if you notify in advance and somebody thinks that they have the ability to weigh in and say no, when the ordinance already says yes, also can create some contention, right? So you're notifying somebody, they're saying, hey, I get a
Can't
say
do
in
anything.
this, when in fact, if they meet the standards of the ordinance, they don't.
Yeah.
That can cause a little bit of contention as well. But-
So we had a motion by myself about 20 minutes ago. Cherie had a second with additional comments to add input from Chief Jackson.
So the motion, then, as I understand it, would be to recommend to the council that the council take public comment, but continue it and potentially have a work session or do other outreach efforts before adopting a final ordinance.
And get
they do the work session?
Well, we want to specify the work session.
a public work session where public can have comments.
Oh, you do want the public involved, or do you want to take public comment at the night of the city council meeting? And then, is it a public hearing next?
It would be a public hearing.
It'd be a
Yeah.
public hearing, so the city council would have to go through this and
same thing.
additional comments as well.
Mhm. And then we could take what we get from that, and I would say,
Well, they would have to take the public comment at their city council meeting,
Yes.
and either yes or no. The other option is to continue it all together and not
Oh.
bring it before the city council and say more public comment and more city staff work is required before we can bring this forth.
And we're fine with that as well, other than it's difficult for us right now to have any idea of what we would be bringing back to the Planning Commission based on what we've had tonight.
Yeah, I would say,
Chief Jackson and maybe a couple of cities that are similar in size and demographic.
Those are things we could,
yeah,
those are
not
direct, that's a direction.
specific, like boom, 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 this is what you want. I would say, yeah, just to provide what information and research you could to that work session.
Okay.
But I
So
do
you
want to
better
make
make a
sure.
new motion
Yeah,
that
you want to
we-
restate?
I think you did. I'll second it as.
I would say we recommend that we continue this without going to city council.
Right. Okay.
And have the staff provide any information that they can gather from productive and, what's the word? Positive feedback, positive places that have these things. And we would like a work session with the council, the commission, and Chief Jackson before we take it to, before we recommend it to the city council.
So the work session would be, this body has the ability to say, well, you would like one, but you wouldn't be able to make a motion that it has to be with the council. You could recommend that, but.
That the council has a work session amongst themselves. We're not invited.
No. Who's on first, right? That's where we're at. So it sounds to me like where you're probably at is you recommend continuance.
Mhm.
You direct staff to provide you with additional information, with the
Provide.
discussion with Chief Jackson, and that we, as a commission, schedule a work session.
With the council. Can you not meet with the council too before they have theirs?
We can ask if that's something they want to schedule.
I think it would be great to have all of us. That's what my amended motion is.
And that's doable, Sean? That's that last.
We can do everything, and we can ask the council. There's, like, the commission's motion
Can always
can't bind
ask.
them to,
Right.
to meet in a work
Sure.
session, right?
You can't.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion from Cherie and a second from Lewis. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
TJ, nay?
I'm an A.
TJ's a nay.
So anything that happens will be renoticed. We've got all your emails that sent them in, so I'll make sure we respond to those too as well. Thanks for coming and participating.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate your
Thanks for your input.
Thank you.
I just had one comment that I didn't get to.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good point. And I think that's what they're asking for. So.
It's not like that, because that would really, one more thing, like birds per se, but that would really sometimes restrict. Zone exits, zone parking. They're all different requirements. All the requirements.
Good point.
They require what changes. You can have accessory apartment, and you can have short-term or you can long-term. Right, but you need to have an accessory apartment permit to be able to have it. That really narrows down pretty quickly. And you wouldn't be inundated. They wouldn't fill the whole city because they can't.
I think you've got certain people though who might like the opportunity, like one that said, hey, well, not necessarily them, because it sounds like they want us to see it.
She laughed hysterically.
Hey, I'm gonna be gone for 2 months this summer, and while I'm gone,
2 months. I can rent my house on a month-by-month basis. They don't require me to leave. I can rent it out month-by-month basis. That's not the stuff. That's what requires a accessory apartment.
I didn't know.
I know, that's what your wife is saying.
No.
Which seems to be.
That's great.
Is box, but this thing is that we are, that already exists. And.
All right, well.
Both has, if they had complaints and they didn't have. That's when short-term rentals. Right. It wouldn't be just like, oh, my guy down the street's doing it.
yeah.
Along with the business license, right? I don't think it's one or the other. I think you get both of those. Of course, the second one, I got skewed because I have the ability to do it. Yeah. But in my apartment I have on 1600, my kids are living there right now. Right. And that's fine. And, you know, it's a family, but eventually my kids may not all live there. Maybe one lives there. And the other side, the accessory side or whatever it is, could be long-term or short-term rented. That, it seems to me that this broad view that this is going to be an inundation, everyone's going to come in and do.
There's not enough demand for a huge change, right?
But then that kind of restriction might alleviate some of the concerns that are happening. That's why.